Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to look at world politics through a lens you might not expect: feminism. And here's the thing. It's a perspective that doesn't just add women to the story of global power. No, it fundamentally rewrites the entire script.
So, where do we even begin? Well, it all starts with this really simple but profound question from a theorist named Cynthia Enloe. She just asked, where are the women? I mean, just 4 words. But with those 4 words, she basically challenged the entire field of international relations. She forced it to confront who is being completely left out of all its big theories about war and peace and power.
Okay, so to really dig into that question, we need a working definition, right? So what is feminism? At its very core, it's a movement all about analyzing and ultimately eliminating the global subordination of women. We're talking economic, political, social, all of it. It's about fighting for justice and equality for all women.
But, and this is so important to get, feminism is not some single monolithic idea. It's not one rule book. It's this vibrant, living field that's always debating and critiquing itself. It's constantly pushing to figure out what true liberation really looks like for everyone.
You know, for Black feminists like Barbara Smith and the Combahee River Collective, this meant the struggle had to be intersectional. That's the key word. They argued you just can't separate gender from race, from class, from sexuality. Their core argument was absolutely transformative. They said, look, if you can create a world where Black women are free, then by definition, everyone else has to be free too.
And this wasn't just happening in one place. This critique was global. You had scholars from the global south, like Madhu Kishwar from India, who were challenging Western feminist movements. They were saying, hey, you can't just export your own issues and assumptions onto us. They were pointing out how Western feminism was ignoring the legacies of imperialism and the totally different priorities of women in other parts of the world.
So here's the crucial takeaway. The question had to evolve. It couldn't just be, where are the women anymore? It had to become, okay, but which women are where? And that nuance is everything. Because, the experience of being a woman isn't universal. Power, oppression, it's all shaped by your race, your class, your sexuality, and literally where you are on the planet.
But, for the longest time, trying to answer these questions on a global scale was, it was basically impossible. And why? Simple. The data just didn't exist. Nobody was collecting it. In the official story told by statistics, the lives and contributions of women were almost completely invisible.
That all started to change with something called the UN Decade for Women. This was a really pivotal time, and thanks to some pretty intense lobbying by women's organizations, the international community was finally forced to start gathering real information on the status of women all around the world.
And wow, the data that came out of this was absolutely revolutionary. It made inequality impossible to ignore. For the first time, we could actually see it in black and white. Globally, women earn 19% less than men. Just think about that for a second. That gap is so stubborn that at the rate we're going, it would take centuries to close.
And this new data started to explain why that pay gap is so hard to get rid of. It showed that all around the world, women do 3 times as much unpaid care and domestic work as men. We're not just talking about a to-do list for the house. This double burden has a huge direct impact on their ability to earn a living wage and get ahead in the formal economy.
The data also drove home just how vital it is to ask which women. Take the United States, for example. For every single dollar a white man earns, a Latina woman makes just 54 cents. It's such a stark reminder that gender and racial inequality, they don't just add up, they actually multiply each other.
So all this new data proved that inequality wasn't just some accident, it was systemic. It was built into the system. And if the problem is the system, feminist scholars realized they had to start looking at the system itself. And that led them to ask this really profound question. What if the core institutions of world politics, like the state, are actually structured in a way that's inherently male?
Okay, so here's the argument. The idea is that our whole concept of the state is built on these pairs of opposites, what scholars call binaries. And in these pairs, one side is always valued more than the other. So on one side, you get all the traits we traditionally associate with masculinity. Rational, public, strong. And those are seen as essential for leadership. And on the other side, you have traits linked to femininity, like being emotional, private, nurturing. And those are devalued, pushed to the side.
And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. If you look at history, the state was literally built this way. For a long time, women didn't even have full legal status. They were often considered the property of a male guardian.
And they were legally pushed into the private, domestic sphere through institutions like marriage, which really locked in their subordinate status.
A perfect example of this, the military. I mean, its whole culture is often built around this band of brothers idea, reinforcing a very specific ideal of masculinity as the protector. And this is the key point. Institutions like the military don't just reflect the gender norms of society, they actively create and enforce them. They decide who belongs and who doesn't.
So this whole way of thinking has led to a bunch of different feminist theories. And honestly, a really good way to get your head around them is to think of them like 4 different pairs of glasses, or lenses. You put on each one, and it reveals a totally different aspect of how gender and power are working in world politics.
Okay, first up, let's look through the liberal lens. The core question here is really all about access. This view sees gender inequality as a barrier holding things back. And so the solution? It's to fix the system from the inside, get rid of discriminatory laws, and get more women into the existing power structures. We're talking parliaments, boardrooms, peace talks, you name it.
Next, we've got the critical lens. This one argues that we have to look way deeper than just representation. It says you absolutely cannot separate gender oppression from the economic system of capitalism. It really focuses on how the entire global economy is basically held up by devaluing women's work, both the paid labor in factories and, just as importantly, all that unpaid labor at home. Then there's the post-colonial lens, and this one challenges the whole idea of a single, universal woman's experience. It argues that you just can't understand gender today without understanding the history of colonialism and race, because that history created wildly different realities for women in the global north compared to the global south.
And finally, we have the post-structural lens, which it offers maybe the most radical idea of all. It just flips the whole script. It suggests that our entire concept of biological sex isn't some natural fact, but is actually shaped by our ideas about gender. It argues that gender is performative. What does that mean? It means it's not something fixed that we are, but a set of actions that we do. Kind of like an actor following a social script that's been handed to them.
So, you might be thinking, okay, that's a lot of theory. Why does any of this matter today? Well, because it gives us the tools we need to analyze some of the biggest global issues we're facing, everything from foreign policy and war to climate change.
And we're seeing this play out in the real world with the rise of what's called feminist foreign policy. You have countries like Sweden and Canada, for instance, who are actually pledging to make gender equality a central pillar of their diplomacy, their foreign aid, and even their security decisions. But this is exactly where that post-colonial lens tells us to be cautious. Scholars in this area point to how the language of women's rights has in the past been used to justify military interventions. This dynamic is captured perfectly in this really sharp critique from Gayatri Spivak. It forces us to seriously question any narrative about saving women, which can end up ignoring what local women actually want and instead serve completely different political goals. So, when you get right down to it, feminism doesn't just add women into the picture of world politics and stir. It challenges the entire frame of the picture. It gives you a completely different view of how power actually works. And that leaves us with a final question. And it's not just something to think about, but something to actively use. Now that you have this lens, what do you see differently?